Happy Thriving Thursday. Let's talk about the seller's disclosure statement. So all of us agents know that the seller must fill out the seller's disclosure statement when they list a house for sale for the prospective buyers to look at and acknowledge. So the Seller's Disclosure Act applies only to the transfer of not less than one or more than 4 residential dwelling units. So between 1 and 4 units. But did you know when the seller is actually exempt from having to fill it out? So there's a lot of common misconceptions about this, so I thought we could go over some Q&A because I've seen some done incorrectly on the MLS. So, question. The owner of the home I am listing inherited the home from her father. She does not live in the home, but legal title is in her name. Does there need to be a seller's disclosure statement? Yes. While property owned by an estate is exempt under the Seller's Disclosure Act, so as long as the personal representative does not live in the home. Once the property has been distributed from the estate to the heir, it is no longer exempt. Another question. A widow put her home in a trust and named her 2 children as successor trustees. After her death, one of the children moved into the home temporarily until it could be sold. Does there need to be a seller's disclosure statement? Say it with me. Yes. The trustee who is residing in the home must complete a seller's disclosure statement because only non-occupant fiduciaries are exempt under the Seller's Disclosure Act. Another question. I'm listing an REO property. The bank is exempt from providing a seller's disclosure form. But I'm being told by the agent representing the buyer that my client must provide a signed seller's disclosure form that has the word exempt on it. Is this true? No. There's no provision in the Seller's Disclosure Act that requires an exempt party to provide a form. Another question. My sellers are not going to provide a seller's disclosure statement because they have never lived in the residence, but have only used it as a rental. Is this proper? No. Sellers are not exempt from the Seller's Disclosure Act requirements just because they have never lived in the property. Sellers who have owned and leased a residence must nonetheless fill out the seller's disclosure statement to the best of their knowledge. The list of exemptions can be found in Section 3 of the Seller's Disclosure Act. So even if they don't even live in the same state, have never even stepped foot in the house, they own it, they got to fill it out. Another question. My client is selling his house to one of his nephews. He believes that he's exempt from the Seller's Disclosure Act because he is selling his home to a relative. Is he correct? No. The Seller's Disclosure Act contains an exception for transfers made to a spouse, parent, grandparent, child, or grandchild. No such exemption exists for transfers to other relatives. Since the Seller's Disclosure Act applies only to the transfer of 1 to 4 residential units, the seller does not have to fill one out for vacant land or units that have more than 4 units to them. And since we're on the subject about disclosures, here's one about the lead-based paint disclosure, because this does come up often. I have a seller who is selling a house built in 1980. The buyer's agent said that my client must provide a lead-based paint seller's acknowledgement form, MR Form L1, stating that the house was built in 1978 or later. Is this true? So, while Michigan Realtors has created Form L1, whereby the sellers acknowledge that their home was built in 1978 or later and is therefore exempt from the lead-based paint disclosure law. However, the form is provided as a risk reduction measure only to document that the seller says that their house is such an age, but it's not required under the law to provide such a form. The law only requires if the home was built prior to 1978, a seller must complete a lead-based paint seller's disclosure form. So I'm also going to link to a document that lists all of the instances where a seller is actually legally exempt from filling out the disclosure. So my source for today was the Legal Hotline FAQ magazine from Michigan Realtors, February 2018. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to help. Please continue to practice kindness out there. I hope you have a great, thriving Thursday and a wonderful weekend.